I very often get asked, how can I learn to remember all those chord shapes? And the answer to that is maybe a little bit surprising. There is one way that you should be learning and practicing chords that's really overlooked, and that's a pity because it's very efficient and a practical way to come up with some great sounding chord ideas that you can actually use in your playing. Usually when you're starting with learning a type of jazz chords like drop 2 voicings, then the first thing that you focus on is learning the inversions of the chords, like this D minor 7. Obviously, that's a good way to learn the voicings for a specific chord and anyway a good exercise, but you also need to learn the inversions for all the other chords. And then you would have to repeat that process, learning inversions whenever you add extensions or alterations. And in the meantime, you're not working on actually using the chords to make music. It's not put together and used for anything. It's just grips. So instead of focusing too much on practicing a ton of inversions where the chords are not in any type of context and you're not making music with them, then there's another thing that's much more useful to explore. And that's what I want to show you in this video. My name is Larsen. Learn jazz, make music. As you can see, I'm using drop 2 voicings in this video, but really the same is true for all other types of chords, whether you're working with shell voicings, drop 3 or triad voicings. Now, if we take the chords that I showed you in the beginning, then you can put 3 voicings together and play a 2-5-1 like this. And you could go over all the inversions of this as well, but I think there is something else that is much more useful to explore. Because if you want to comp with these chords in a piece of music, that should be something like this. If you're using chords to comp or play chord solos, then the most important thing is flexibility. And if you only practice the chords as static grips and inversions, then you're not organizing them and linking them in a way that's going to help you make music with them. So instead, it's a lot more practical to not think about different chord voicings as much as just have different variations of the same voicing. It's a little bit like a pizza. We just think of it as one thing, but you can have pizzas with all sorts of toppings and we still think of it as a pizza and don't have to remember it as separate meals. Let me show you what I mean. Take a look at the D minor 7 voicing that I'm using. If you know the notes around this chord, then you can make some variations of this voicing. And it's still really just the same chord, it's just adding different colors to it, similar to putting different things on top of a pizza. I guess the big question now is, which extension is the pineapple on the pizza? But let's discuss that in the comments. The big advantage is that I have all these voicings as variations of one thing, so I don't have to practice all of them in inversions. I'm checking them out in one place where I can use them, and if I were to try to take these through inversions, then some of them could be pretty difficult chords to play and maybe not even worth checking out. So the answer to the question at the beginning of the video, how can I learn to remember all those chord shapes, is that I don't really remember different chord shapes. I just know a lot of variations of the same chord. And I practice them so that I can use them together. And I actually spend time practicing using them together because that's what I want to be able to do with them. So I'm using that if I can make a pizza with pepperoni, then I can probably also make a pizza Hawaii. The next thing to work on is how you practice to think like that. Let's start with the D minor 7 voicing and explore some options around that one. If you want more voicings with different extensions and alterations, then you need to understand the context of the chord. For this video, you can just see the D minor 7 as being part of the C major key and the 2 chord in a 2-5-1. If you want to have different options, then you need to know the scale around the voicing. Of course, we only need the top part, but you anyway want to know your scales. If you're looking at this voicing, then the notes in the chord are put so that we have low to high, 3rd, 7th, root, and 5th. To make changes to the chord, then you still want to keep the core notes of the chord. So in this case, that's the 3rd and the 7th, and the chord still has a root and a 5th, and that's gonna give you some freedom. So you can play the 9th, the E instead of the root, or the 11th instead of the 5th, and you can have the 9th and the 11th, and you can also replace the 5th with the 13th. Easiest way to make your comping sound good is to tie together the chords with melody. This is in part voice leading so that the transition from chord to chord is pretty smooth, but it's just as important that you think about the melody in the chords, in the top note, and also the rhythm of that melody to really make it a piece of music. Here's an example of a 2-5-1 that's using the D minor 7 voicings and this area to play the chords. can probably recognize the different variations of the D minor 7 voicing, and then the variation where I have a 9th and 11th. And the main thing to notice is that I really think about the top note melody. The G7 altered voicings are really done in the same way as the D minor 7, but I'm using a G7 from the altered scale, so I get a flat 13 and also a flat 9 and a flat 5. The C major 7 is of course just first the basic voicing. And then I'm using the fact that when you have a tonic chord in major, in a 2-5-1, you can actually choose between having a major 6 and a major 7. So I'm using that as well, going from C major 7 to a C6-9. So what you want to practice is more about exploring the melodies that you can play with the chords, and not only playing them, but also making small phrases with them, like I'm doing here. A thing that will really open up your comping is also to realize that you can leave out the top note of these 4-note chords, and then you actually have access to more melodies, and you can play a big chunk of the entire scale, like this. I do have some videos where I explore this type of thinking in more detail. One of them is on satin doll. I'll link to that in the description of this video. If you want to explore another way of practicing jazz chords that also incorporates different grooves and rhythms, then check out this video, which goes over a basic set of voicings and then shows you how to use them in a lot of different ways, teaching you some sambas and some walking bass and chords, and also some songs along the way.